Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel for what will be my final playthrough of this game, carrying on the scenario that we've been playing already, the 1796 campaign. But this time I've injected in as many as I can of the advanced rules just to show you how they impact play and what difference they make. Now, the beauty of the advanced rules is that every single one is optional. You can pick and choose whatever you want. They do help adjust play balance a bit, but that's really handy because you can benefit a new player by giving them some advantages, or if you feel one side is a little too overpowered, you can level the playing field a bit for the purposes of a good game, if admittedly, as always, at the expense of a simulation. But then, as the designer of this wonderful thing said in his own notes, this is more game than simulation, and really just to give you a really broad brush flavor for the period. And if I can carry on with this, if I can inject maybe a food metaphor into it, so the advanced rules are really that nice extra bit of seasoning on the top. So what do the advanced rules bring in? Well, first of all, they bring in two new unit types to add to the plethora that are given to you in the standard game. Oop, wrong side. So you've already got all these guys in the standard game. And the advanced game gives you light infantry and horse artillery, which are very easy to integrate because all they've done is tweak the combat rules very, very slightly to reflect the unique contribution these unit types made to the Napoleonic battlefield. Now, we won't actually see horse artillery in this playthrough because it did not actually become commonplace on the battlefield until later in the Napoleonic Wars. However, you will see light infantry. I surreptitiously updated two of the French units while I was preparing for turn 3 because, of course, they introduced their light infantry swarms in the 1790s, and certainly by 1796 they were an integral part of the French army's makeup. So there's the two units. Card play also comes back in as a consequence of the advanced rules if you decide to use them. And in the advanced rules, there are two kinds of cards. There are the innovation cards. Now, these are not shuffled into the deck unless you're playing an ahistorical game. I prefer to play historical because it really gives a flavor for the two sides. So the French are the biggest beneficiaries of these because they have levée en masse, which gives them extra production points, which are very handy when you're fighting the rest of Europe. They have nationalism, which no one else will catch up with until Great Britain, as you can see, is the next one in 1800, and Russia and Prussia will lag. But it gives them a +1 to their rallying, which can be useful if you have a leader about. And most importantly, for offensive purposes, light infantry tactics. And if we do get a battle generated this turn, I will show off the light infantry and what they can do. If a battle is avoided, I might just stage a little fight so you can see what they get up to, or just talk you through it. The British have no particular national advantages as of the 1790s, but the Austrians do. The Austrians have their very handy light cavalry screens, which can materially help them when it comes to setting up and gaining an initial advantage during a battle. See, they could have really done with that in the basic game that we've been playing, but, they still have some cavalry left, so they may yet be able to do something with all this. There's also the regular cards from the draw deck, and these come in two flavors: effect and random event. Now, they're drawn during the production phase. They're also drawn whenever you win a major battle, you get two of them, or when you lose a major battle, you get one of them. So your hand is constantly topping up, and you also have a hand limit of 4 cards, which can be a blessing because sometimes you get some useless tat. So because the French and the Austrians, or even the British for that matter, were not likely to draw any cards in the context of this turn unless there's a major fight, and when you draw them at that point, that it's late enough in the turn that often you can't do anything with them. So I've slightly reverse engineered this to assume that cards were drawn as a consequence of last turn's battle. But I'm going to have to resolve some of the effects right this instant, because effect cards you can keep in your hand and play whenever you want or whenever the card tells you. Random events must be played immediately. And of course, the French got two of them last turn. So let's see what happened to France. Clumsy diplomacy, lose one political action point. Well, luckily for the French, they didn't have any. They'd already spent their PAP inciting trouble in Ireland for the British. So phew, those are expensive things to get, political action points. So losing one for no purpose would have been horrendous. In terms of what triggered that, I imagine it might be the famous incident where Napoleon was really rude to the Austrian envoys who come to try and talk him out of advancing on Vienna. But yeah, I don't know whether that would have been sufficiently costly for French diplomacy. But whatever it is, somebody has blundered. The next one is slightly more serious. Artillery distributed to infantry regiments. Lose one artillery unit of your choice. Ouch. So I don't know what cone-headed bureaucrat was responsible for that idea, but it leaves the French in a bit of a quandary, because all three of their major field armies, who are triumphantly churning towards Austria at the moment, have plentiful artillery, as we can see, and none of them particularly want to lose that artillery. The only other place they could lose it from would be the defences along the Normandy coastline. But that too is dangerous, because that might encourage the British to try a sneaky landing if that wonderful grand battery is split up and distributed around to the other units there, because it effectively disappears, really. So that is a really tough choice for the French, but it's a choice they've got they have no option but to make it, if you see what I mean. Oh, Andrew, snap decisions. Come on, Captain Indecisive. Okay, I'm going to take a huge risk and just say that because Napoleon's army has some advantages that the other northern French armies don't, I'm going to very, very reluctantly tell the general that as a consequence of his incredible successes on the Italian front, the Directory is stripping him of his artillery. Don't let it be said we don't know how to look after our own people in revolutionary France. So that was actually quite a painful one for the French. The other ones are rainstorm, which could be useful in a battle, and smuggling of British goods onto the continent. Well, that's absolutely useless if you're France, because all it does is gives perfidious Albion more money. What they can do, however, is hold that card in their hand just out of spite to make sure the British don't get it. Now, what of the poor Austrians? Because they were entitled to a card each as consolation prizes for the two major battles they lost last turn. The first is royal marriage, and you gain 2 political action points. Well, that is very decent indeed. So, out of the ashes of defeat, the Austrians have married one of their many princesses off to someone with lots of money or a lot of importance with almost indecent haste. And that has netted them a very rich pair of political action points. Now, they may well end up losing it if they're defeated, badly, if they lose the war outright. But for the moment, those things are nice to have because they could try and woo another country as an ally. Britain would like them to do that. The other problem they have is defection. Lose one infantry unit of your choice. Well, I can't say it's surprising. With all the recent defeats, morale must be at absolute rock bottom. It doesn't really make sense thematically. You see, partly out of spite, my knee-jerk reaction was to give the defecting unit to the British, but I don't. For the sake of thematic gameplay, I can't see how a disgruntled Austrian unit would somehow. I suppose you could march north to Hanover, so it's not totally. But you have to place it in the nation's capital, so I don't know. Also, I don't think the British would want to take them in, because I can't think of any better way of ruining your already fragile alliance with the Habsburgs than taking in a bunch of their deserters and go, oh, no, no, we'll make use of these guys. I mean, we're short of army anyway, as you can see. No, I think them joining the British is a no-no, even though it's not a contravention of the rules. So I'm going to say they defect to the French, and the only painful decision is, where do these guys defect from? Um, Again, a very tough choice. I'm going to say, only because Napoleon is pretty much unstoppable. And actually, come to think of it, relatively speaking, so are the other two French armies. I'm going to possibly fatally weaken this formation down here. And the French gain a new regiment of admittedly trained soldiers, but they probably have trouble understanding them depending from which part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire they hail. But anyway, it's more troops and France is not complaining. So that was the card play from last turn. And we can now get straight back into the consideration of what to do this turn. So it's the top of the strategic round, and it's Britain. Britain has an awful lot to worry about this turn. Their ally, Austria, has been soundly thrashed and is basically retreating back to their own borders in disarray. They still have enough men to clump together a decent army, but they're kind of pinned because the French have so many axes of approach, including into unprotected parts of the empire. They could raise all sorts of mayhem. And the Austrians are seriously off balance. So the question now becomes, what is Britain going to do about it? The answer is, Britain is actually extremely reluctant to do anything about it, because they have a full-blown rebellion in Ireland. In fact, I'm going to make the one easy move for the British, which is to withdraw the garrison of Ireland into Ulster, because you need a minimum of 2 or 3 infantry or any kind of army unit to put down a revolt. And even then, that's barely adequate. You probably will lose people. So Ireland is in flames, and the British need to do something about that, because even if they commit everyone they've got to putting down that revolt, it may not be sufficient. So they have their bushfire that they need to deal with over there. So in a way, the last thing they want to do is withdraw people. I mean, they could leave that simmering, because the other concern they have is, yes, the Royal Navy has thrown a blockade around around the French coastline, rather. So the chances of an invasion fleet coming through are not impossible, but they're very unlikely. And also, the French don't really have the strength to do anything. They need to establish sea control. So the British are feeling a bit safe. The question is, what do they do? What do they send? Because in the advanced and the standard rules, you can only move as many units as you have fleets or squadrons adjacent to your destination. Now, if I were the British, I would want to move some units, maybe to reinforce Hanover, because that gives the French a threat that they have to worry about to the north, even if it's only 2 units. I think, despite my comments in an earlier video, desperate though the current circumstances are, with an eye on Spain, the British would not withdraw this lone guy from Gibraltar. Gibraltar is just too important. They have to maintain their garrison there. So I think the hard decision the British are going to come to is that they're going to let Ireland do its thing for now. They will deal with the Irish revolt in the future, but they simply don't have the strength to at the moment. Ordinarily, they just pump more money in the direction of the Austrians and hope that hope that they can stand on their own 2 feet for a bit. But the French have given them such a drubbing that really is not an option anymore. So, okay, Britannia, time to flex those biceps, tiny and reedy though they are at the moment. So the British are going to take the huge risk of sending What shall we send? Um, let's take a huge chance. We've only got the two squadrons there, but we do have total sea control. The British are going to send their cavalry and their elite infantry over to Hanover to form the beginnings of an army. And also to give those French something to think about. I mean, they could probably crush them, but if it forces them to turn around, then it takes some of the heat off Austria. So the Brits have done that. They're not going to change any of their other deployments. Those guys can't do anything because they've just finished a bit of a jolly sea voyage across the North Sea. So we'll leave the British movement there. There's no battles resulting from it. What about the Austrians? Now, they are in a really tricky position. If they had a Napoleon within their ranks, it might be tempting to gather as many troops as he could and fall on one of the separated French armies and try to crush it and then deal a blow to the other two. But a great problem the Austrians have is that although they have mass, there's a lovely big wodge of infantry. They don't spread out as they are, they don't have tactical flexibility. You've got that small force there with the cavalry, their remaining artillery's back at Vienna with more troops. The French armies, although they're all individually smaller than that mass, they have got the combined arms advantage because they've got a little bit of everything. And they've also got the strategic advantage that the Austrians have to look after their home territory. Whereas from the French perspective, there are no enemies except domestic, but there's certainly no foreign enemies close to their territory. So they can press their advantage and sneak into the Austrian Empire through all these tempting routes. They know full well the British aren't going to attempt an opposed landing this turn because Britain's already had her turn and she just did that slightly wimpy reinforcement of Hanover, but they could probably pinch that out at a future date. For now, Austria's beckoning coquettishly, and if they can knock her out of the war, it would be a significant win. All this doesn't help the Austrians, who have a really difficult decision to make, which is where to concentrate. Do they give up the outer provinces and get everyone to stand at Vienna? Or do they take a bit of a guess and try and go on the offensive? You see, the other problem they have is the limited movement. There's a lot of units there that can only move one. And this is where we come to another option that the advanced rules give you, which is forced march. You can, if you are feeling very brave, attempt to double time your units, and that would give the Austrians some choices. But the potential penalties of doing this are very high, and the odds of failure are pretty high as well. Also, the Austrians don't have an expert foraging card. So, sorry, focus. So if I was Austria, I frankly wouldn't have the courage to try it, because while it's very tempting to try and knock out a French army, it would probably be a very bloody contest, and I suspect any kind of defeat would leave Vienna incredibly vulnerable. So what we are going to do instead is, although it's incredibly cowardly and wimpy, we're going to do the one thing we're absolutely certain we can do. We will give up the outer provinces in order to buy time, and we will all fall back on the capital. Because another thought that occurs to the Austrians is they could try and make a diplomatic overture to another country. They could try and talk to the Prussians or the Russians. And actually, that might be worth doing, because they do have two political action points. And you can do this at any time during your turn. So, yes, who shall we talk to? We need to open a dialogue with someone. Of the two choices, Prussia is tempting because they're close by and they can be of immediate help, but they're not quite the huge juggernaut that Russia over there is. Russia, of course, would take time to mobilize her forces, and they've got a bit more distance to cover before they can help. But maybe, because bear in mind, nobody knows who Napoleon is. They're fighting the French Republic. And aside from the fact that they seem to be executing an upsetting number of their own citizens, and generally, engaging in a lot of political infighting and just general lunacy. Hopefully, they have enough strategic sense that if Russia suddenly weighs in, this will be good news for the British too. Maybe they can give the Russians some bribes to make it happen. Then that might make the French think twice. So the Austrians are going to do it. This handy royal marriage of theirs that gave them the two political action points, they're going to cash those in. Now, Russia, because she is a non-player nation, so effectively the Austrians would take control of her if this succeeds. They need to roll against Russia's diplomatic rating, which is listed in the scenario table. Bear one moment. So we have Austria trying to reach an accommodation with Russia. So the target number is 5. Now, because this is so important, give me a second to remind myself whether that's rolling equal or less than, or equal to or higher than. Okay, this is chancy. The Austrians need equal to or less than 5, which is oof on 2 dice. Okay, this is what desperation does to you guys. So they've cashed their political overture in. And the Russians are not biting. Okay, so the Tsar listens patiently and possibly a bit pityingly, but he says, no, sorry, your problem. And the Austrians lose those 2 political action points. So there we go. The Austrians have had their chance on the diplomatic field, and they decided not to go on the offensive in the military field because it probably would have just resulted in the pointless loss of men, and they really need every man to hold the capital now. So this brings us very neatly to the French turn. And what is France going to do? Well, I think the answer is actually fairly obvious. The French have a massive advantage, and they would be foolish not to press it home. The question is, are they feeling like they want to do something about the British up there, or do they want to just strike in and deal with the Austrians? Now, I think they're going to take a bit of a risk. They do want to close in. So their 2 main armies are going to join up in Bavaria, but they're not going to force march. like the Austrians, they want to be a bit careful about this. It would be nice to have a huge climatic showdown, climactic, with the Austrians, but they don't want to do it at a disadvantage. Because the other thing is the French do have time on their side. The Russians are not coming, and although it's everyone's production phase now, they can mess the Austrians up a bit. Um, in fact, let's do that very thing. Or no, it'll be a bit risky. Sorry, I was talking to myself and not really letting you know what was going on in my head. So essentially, what I was thinking was I could spread the French armies out a bit into Austrian territory, and in doing so, prevent them from getting any benefit from the upcoming production phase. But that could be a bit chancy because the Austrians will have the next turn. And if the French are too spread out, they might give in to the temptation to fall on an isolated part of the French army and go for it. That said, and this is where I start talking myself into circles, that said, if they do that, they weaken the garrison of Vienna before the rest of the French army takes its turn. So what to do? Because it's still the French movement phase, I could change my mind. No, I think I will carry on being cautious. I am a cautious fellow, as so many of you know. So, and it's enough of a worry that Napoleon's army is down in Tyrol, separated from the larger Republican formations. Although, mind you, he would take some killing if the Austrians decided to fall on him and try and take him out. So I'm not too worried about him. He's got heavy cavalry, he's got his inspired leadership. His army has light infantry as well. So I think they've not got too much to fear, really. And even if they do lose, they'll take out such a proportion of the Austrian force it will make the rest of the army's life easy. Plus, he's also occupied a province, which is going to mess the Austrians up a bit. Now, the other question the French have is, should they do anything to strike at Britain? See, part of me wants to demonstrate naval combat because it's brief but fun. But equally, I don't want to mess France up just for the sake of a demonstration. There are very powerful British squadrons hovering out there, and the last thing the French want to do is leave out their fleet in being advantage. So I think for the sake of good strategic gameplay, I won't commit the French fleets on a suicide mission yet. If this were a longer game, I would do, but I wouldn't commit them on a suicide mission. I mean, I'd send them out. But I would want to build up their strength just a little bit, because if you have enough naval squadrons trying to elbow their way out to sea, even if the British intercept and destroy a lot of them, there's a higher chance the more ships you send out that some of them will break through. So the French are going to keep that option. So that actually brings things to a close, and June 1796 actually passes with no combat. So, because of what I said about light infantry, I'll really just give you guys a quick demo of what they can do. So there we go. Let's just say we're in the middle of a bit of a skirmish between some French light infantry and their Austrian opposite numbers. So the only thing you need to remember with light infantry is that they die harder. They are eliminated on a 1 or 2 if they're hit, rather than a 1 to 3. They hit in volley fire at a +1 because of their training, and they can avoid a charge by infantry. So how that works in practice is, let's say the Austrians shoot at them, needing a 9 to hit, or do they? One sec. Yeah, regular infantry still score hits on a 9, and the Austrians handily hit them. Now, that would be, they rolled a 4 for the effect, so that would be a retreat. Now, if the French are, if the position's reversed and the French are returning fire with their light infantry, that would be a hit anyway. But if they rolled an 8, which is technically below the threshold, it would be a hit too, because they're light infantry. And they suffer a -1 penalty in close combat. So let's say the Austrian unit declared a charge, they could simply declare that they're avoiding the charge, much the same way that cavalry does. So that basically is it for light infantry. They're very useful on the battlefield. I find it's really fun when you send them out accompanying light cavalry, because those two work so well together in concert. Now, what about naval battles? Shall we say, for the sake of example, I don't have a seascape one, so this is sorry, a seascape battle map. So this is going to look a bit weird, but bear with me. So let's say that the fleet in Marseille is trying to sneak past the two British naval squadrons who are out on blockade. The first thing you do is check for interception. So now, of course, happily for the British, it's very easy to intercept a unit that's attempting to leave port, because, I mean, you just guard the entrance to port. Now, the British failed miserably, so bad weather, ineptitude, whatever, the French fleet would sneak past in those circumstances. If they had not, you then go straight to the naval battles table. Let me roll white dice for French and red for British. So the British won the basic dice roll by 1 point. They get a bonus because they're British, Royal Navy, hurrah. So their total would actually be 8 to 6. And that is a number of naval squadrons in the area. So the British totals brought up to 10 and the French to 7. So a difference of 3 is a loss of 2 squadrons. So that would have ended up being a bit of a painful one for the French. Their naval squadron would simply have been wiped out. And that is naval combat. It really is that simple in this game. But it also can be quite chancy, because even with the British bonus, you'd want to think twice about engaging in a major battle. But of course, in this scenario, as you can see, the British have twice as many ships as the French. So there's nothing for them to worry about, really. So we've come to the end of the round, and it's now time for everyone to check whether they put down their uprisings first. Nobody does, because nobody has the strength to. The way putting down uprisings work is you roll 2 dice, and if you get a total equal to or less than the number of military units you have in the affected province, then you put the uprising down. If you don't, you lose one of the military units you do have there, which is why I ordered the retreat of that British unit from Ireland, because there was no way that regiment was going to suppress the revolt on its own, and it would have just inevitably been burned up. So the British will have to deal with theirs and the French with theirs at another time. So the final thing that happens, because it's the end of the June turn, is production. So in this scenario, in with the advanced rules, it's the same as with the standard rules. You get a certain number of points for your capital depending on who you are. It's 10 for the British and French, and it's 8 for the Austrians. And then you get a further 2 points for all your home territories, and if you have access to them, other territories you control. Now, curiously enough, because the French armies have moved on without establishing political control, the Austrians do trace a line of communication, thanks to their ports, to these territories of theirs in Italy. So So they get 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 22, 23, 24. And that's how that works. And you can then spend all this lovely stuff either on military units. So you can see even with this decent amount of money that you get, spending is still pretty tight. You only ever get a trickle of reinforcements, really. Now, to help the Austrians, Britain is the only player in the game who, true to historical reality, can pass production points to her allies. So the British haven't actually updated uh, um, the production points track, but you can see Austria already is a way behind France, but Britain could redress that balance by transferring a load of production points to Austria. Of course, Britain won't transfer an unlimited number of points because she has her own plans. So the British spending would probably be focused on building up her army, both to deal with the spectre of a French invasion once they've sorted Austria out, and also the urgent need to put down the revolt in Ireland and maybe leave a permanent garrison there, a huge garrison, just in case Ireland misbehaves again. Also, the British want to build up their fleet because although they have a big overall margin of superiority, they would like that margin to be much bigger than it actually is. The Austrians really want to spend all their money on military units and maybe some political action points, but really it's all about trying to defend the empire. Of course, if they lose a major battle the next turn outside their capital, there's a very real risk that they'll be knocked completely out of the war. So just get those troops under arms and get them out there, Austria. And as for the French, it's a bit of everything. They have marched over a huge swathe of rich European lands that they need to take. So they'll need political action points for that, but they'll also need more men. They need peace too, so that they can settle these revolts using the units they've got. So France is being pulled strategically in a lot of directions right now and is almost, ironically, a victim of her own success. But, at the moment, I think from the French perspective, anything that gives you the manpower to finish off the Austrians or to keep France ticking over while the armies that are already there do what they've got to do, because it does just need that one victory to sort them out, and hopefully a diplomatic solution can be found and France can draw breath again. So there we go. So I'm sorry there wasn't actually any fighting this turn, but it seemed to me it wouldn't be the best gameplay if the Austrians hurled themselves desperately at the French. I couldn't see that one ending well. If I were the Habsburg leadership, I would have dug in around Vienna and tried talking to the Russians, which is exactly what they did. Sadly, the Russians didn't bite. I'm sure they'll regret that later. But anyway, just to say that now covers all the different rule sets to some degree, just to give you a flavor of what they're like. I really hope you guys have enjoyed this series. I certainly have had an absolute blast with it. As always, it's a real pleasure having your company. I really enjoy the interactions that these videos lead to. And if it introduces you to a new game, albeit a bit hard to find these days, then so much the better. Thank you so much. As I say, it is a pleasure. And whoever you are and wherever you're watching from, I really appreciate your attention and I hope you'll find more of interest here.